So with that, I guess we can move into the second workshop,
Yep.
which is on the facilities work that we talked about last, in our last meeting. We had a workshop about this. Staff didn't feel that there was real concise guidance following that. I know we were kind of rushed. We had a lot on our agenda that meeting. So we thought we'd bring it back for discussion today, and with that, have a public hearing, which will follow this. And we're having a first read. We're not voting on anything tonight. We'll have that on our next agenda. So with that, I'll turn it over to the superintendent.
Great. So our agenda for today is to sort of do a quick recap of what we covered at the first meeting 2 weeks ago, and then particularly I'm interested in getting confirmation around two particular issues. So one is the saving versus new directions, and then the other one is inclusion of the island schools in the analysis. And to that end, we've also invited and have with us today Yvonne Thomas from the Island Institute, who's going to share some insights about island schools and the sort of unique place that they have in the educational environment in Maine, and sort of the relationship of schools to island communities. And then begin the conversation with you about the composition of the committee that would oversee this work, and then also talk a little bit about additional communication plans that resulted after, you know, our previous workshop, where you wanted to make sure that we were doing everything within our power to be able to reach out to the community about this process. So our goals are the same as they were at the previous workshop. Just to recap, at the last meeting, what we did is we reminded everybody a little bit of the context in which this work happened. So the fact that we had a challenging budget process, and as a result of that, you passed a resolution that directed us to engage in this work, that said that within 2 months that we were supposed to come back with a work plan, which is what we are doing now. And at the last meeting, we also reviewed that work plan and the sort of the timeline, and I'm going to recap that in a second. And then we began this conversation about the parameters, and that's the piece that I want to finish today. So the timeline from the resolution at a high level is what you see up there. So the resolution was passed in May. We started this conversation in August, and the goal at the time was to approve the plan at today's meeting based on the feedback that we got. We've pushed this off until the next meeting and added the second workshop and a first read and a hearing on this today. So that was in an effort to sort of be more inclusive in this process as we move along. And then after you approve entering into the contract, we will do that and begin the work. But ultimately, this work is scheduled to be done in January, so that you have time for your deliberations over the month of February into March as we begin our budget process. So the schedule for the actual work of the committee is broadly what you see here. So with your review and approval, we would enter into contract. We are we'll begin a survey process asking the community for their thoughts and ideas as we move forward. Sort of the idea is for people that have always said, like, boy, I wish they just did X, that this is an opportunity for them to tell us that, and that we would also appoint the commission that would oversee that work. The commission would work over October, November, and December, and hold hearings at the towards the end of their work, so that they have an opportunity, and you have an opportunity, to hear what the community is thinking about those recommendations as they wind their way to you, and the commission has an opportunity to adjust their recommendations based on the feedback that they hear at those community hearings, and then make a report to you in January, so for you to review and act on over January and February. So that's recap, very quickly of what we talked about. And I think we had broad agreement that this was, the schedule that we would work in. And we also, okay, this is a different slide, I think. So, all right, well, let me just use this. So, we agreed to some parameters. So we reviewed the context, we reviewed the work plan, which included the contract with Davis Demographics. If you recall, we have a proposal from them for about $250,000 worth of work, another one which was with us doing most of the work, and then my recommendation was an in-between option that was $190,000 with us taking over the analysis of costs primarily, as well as the survey work and more of the facilitation of the commission instead of having them do that. And so that's the contract that we proposed. And we started the conversation around those parameters, and the ones that I feel like we had a strong commitment to was that it would be focused pre-K through 12, so we weren't just doing elementary schools, we weren't excluding high schools, things along those lines. That we understand that as a result of this, we could wind up with different grade configurations, so not our K-5, our pre-K-5, middle school 6 through 8, and then high school configuration. We could wind up with something different than that, and that our non-school buildings, so the administration building, the transportation, food service and so on, that would also be in place. So there's a way to consolidate those as part of the cost savings, that we would also evaluate that as part of the study. And I think the recognition that school consolidations and closing may result from the work of the committee. Not will result, but may result. So if the data supports it, that is one of the reasons that we are doing this. We're doing this to, I hope, and this is what I want to make sure that we're clear on today, that we are looking for savings sort of to the base budget that we have, and that that is one of the possible savings might be the consolidation and closing of schools. So so I think that there were broad agreement around. And then the two things that I felt that I was not clear walking out was around savings versus programming, and the island schools and the inclusion of the island schools. And so in conversations with board members one-on-one over the last couple of weeks, we've agreed that we needed to come back and get to that. And I think so, let me move on to that slide. These are the areas that we had talked about. The first one was the right sizing is the outcome. That's what we're trying to do in this process. I've had board members talk to me about, potential programs that they would like to see put in place and things along those lines. And I just want to be clear that the way that we've designed this with the consultant, and it really in terms of what the purview of this, the commission would be, it really is about this right sizing. It's not about thinking about immersion programming or IB programming or things along those lines. That would not be the right setting to have those conversations. Not to say that those are bad conversations to have, but those would not be the purview of the commission. We would not expect them to be coming back with recommendations around those types of changes. Magnet schools, things along those lines, that would not be the result of that. And I keep forgetting to do this, and then I just want to be clear. I'm not asking you today to tell me what you would support if, given what you know today. What I really need from you is direction on what you want to have information about so that you can make informed decisions, because you're not being asked to vote on any of this today. So you're not being asked to vote on closing schools or consolidating schools, on selling the administration building or any of those things. What are the things that you want to have have information about, so that when you are presented with recommendations by the task force, that you have the information that you need, regardless of where you stand philosophically on that issue today, but where you would have additional information that would help inform, not to make you change your mind about where you are today, but just help to inform your thought pattern. So that's what I want to be clear that I'm asking for guidance on. So this idea of right-sizing is what is intended to result from that. And I just want to make sure that we have clarity around that so that the commission can be charged with taking on a task that they understand to be what it is. And then, so the other thing is island schools. And so I've come to understand and appreciate the uniqueness of island schools in the Maine educational context, and I think that it's important for the board as a whole to have that understanding. And so that was part of my conversation with board members over the last couple of weeks, and as a result of that, I asked Yvonne Thomas from the Island Institute. The Island Institute is an advocacy organization that also works with island schools to help them to improve and remain sustainable. And so Yvonne is with us, and she has about a 10-minute presentation on that, so I'm going to turn it over to Yvonne. Sure, yeah.
I apologize, I wasn't here last week, so I've been trying to catch up. I moved a child to college in Florida. So I had a question, and I know that you brought it up in where I was the author of the resolution along with a couple board members weighing in, helping me. I'm glad that you brought up about the all schools question, because when the intent is all schools, including the islands. So that was the intent. I consider those our schools and our facilities. So I had a couple quick questions. The fiscal impact on executive summary states not to exceed $260,000 for the study. That figure came from Davis Demographics, is that correct? Okay. And then the makeup of the task force under the recommendation of the demographics and capacity.
We're going to talk about that. That's the next topic. The commission composition is, like 2 slides down the road. So if you want to just wait, we'll tackle that then.
All right. So then I go there. So the discussion around the length of the, I guess there's just some clarifying things that I wanted to make sure that the public knew what the intent of the resolution was. And I think that we keep talking about that the resolution and this work is being done because we're trying to find savings. While that would be nice, certainly it was more, the intent was to inform the board, the council, the community, and find out what we want our schools to look like. Every budget season, it's people saying, oh, it's time to redistrict, time to close schools, and we haven't gotten that information, and that was the intent of this resolution, was more so, is it time to redistrict? Is it time to close schools? Because the data that we've had over the years does not support that. So I get concerned when we talk about that we're looking for savings. While that's certainly part of the process, and I think that the right sizing is kind of scary to the community, and I think more so when we talk about right sizing is more so to say, do we have the right number of schools? Do we need to expand, or do we need to decrease? And it's not the right size. I understand what you say by right sizing, but it's freaking people out. So I don't know if there's a different kind of way that we can talk about that. But for me, it was more about information gathering, so that when we do meet with the council or when we do hear from the community, well, you only have X amount of students and you should close a school. And so for me, every budget season, I get tired of hearing that because we didn't have the data. So again, I just want to make sure that people know that that was the intent of the resolution. It wasn't to broadside and for to contradict what the vote was with the voters. I think the community spoke loud and clear. This is more to make sure that we're doing our job and making sure we have the right size of everything. So I know that's where you came up with the right sizing, but I don't know. Maybe we can talk about that later. But so the fiscal impact, and then on the question for you, Javier, under the background summary, it says that there would be 2 board actions on first read, and I see that there's one tonight, but,
That was omitted by mistake, so there's
Okay.
supposed to be another first read in there about the, passing this on to the Appointments Committee.
Okay, that's what I was gonna ask
Which we're
you.
going to talk about in a minute.
Okay.
That's the composition conversation.
okay, and the conversation you said will follow?
Yep,
Okay. Thank you.
all right. So, Yvonne?
Hi, I am Yvonne Thomas. I'm the Education Specialist at the Island Institute, and I want to thank you for the chance to speak here on behalf of the islands and the island schools. I really appreciate your interest in learning more about these unique communities. First, I want to just say a word about the Island Institute. We are a 35-year-old community development nonprofit organization based in Rockland, Maine, in the Mid-Coast, and we work to sustain Maine's island and coastal communities by strengthening community economies, enhancing education and leadership, and sharing solutions. And one of the ways we share solutions is through our media products. Many of you may be familiar with the Working Waterfront, which is our newspaper, and it's the third largest publication in the state. I am a strong supporter of island schools and island communities, professionally but also personally. I have lived on the island of Vinyl Haven in the Mid-Coast area for most of my adult life and have spent 20 years working in island schools as the island school counselor. Okay. Islands are very special places to visit and to live. Their natural beauty, the sense of community and safety, and independent and entrepreneurial spirit are among the reasons that people from away, like me, choose to live year-round on Maine islands, and why many families have been on these islands for generations. On islands, small things can have a big impact. Islands are considered microcosms of the wider world because in many ways the challenges we all face are laid bare. And just as it is often easier to see the problems on islands, it's also often easier to see and feel the impact one person, one group, or the whole community can have when trying to solve problems. Islands in Maine vary widely. Each one is different, but they have some shared realities. First, almost everything costs more, sometimes much more. For example, two Maine islands, Monhegan and Matinicus, pay among the highest energy costs in the country. This certainly applies to education as well, where economies of scale and sharing resources are not possible or practical. But all the essential educational services still must be provided, despite the small numbers. And many island schools receive the state minimum for funding. There are some basic systems and infrastructure that all islands must have in order to be viable year-round communities. Transportation, usually via a ferry, allow people, goods, and services to get on and off the island. Weatherized homes suitable for living in year-round. Jobs and economic opportunity. A store, a post office, and increasingly access to high-speed internet or broadband. And of course, a school. Philip Conkling, one of the founders of the Island Institute, tells this cautionary tale about Cree Haven and how they lost their year-round community in just a few short years. Cree Haven is an island next to Matinicus, about 20 miles out to sea in Penobscot Bay. Oh, these slides, it looks different. Very hard to see. Oh well. Anyway, it's the furthest out. After the start of World War II, the island couldn't find a teacher who wanted to live in such a remote location. Without a school teacher, the women and children were forced to go ashore for the school year. Without the women and children on the island, the store could not afford to stay open. Without the women, children, and the store, the mailboat couldn't afford to keep running in the winter. Without the women, children, store, and mailboat, and next the post office too, the lobstermen eventually moved ashore as well. So schools are at the very heart of year-round island communities. And in terms of year-round island viability, they are absolutely critical. So, okay, it's just, I don't even need the slides if they're sort of hard to see, but okay. This is a map that shows the island schools. And at the turn of the century, there were scores of year-round island communities, many with schools, some with multiple schools on the same island. Now, of the 15 remaining year-round island communities, 13 have schools in use. The year-round island communities are clustered in 3 broad geographic areas. 5 are in Casco Bay, 3 are in the Mid-Coast area, and 5 are in Casco Bay, 5 are in the Mid-Coast, and 5 are down east. And there are a range of school grade levels as well. The 4 Casco Bay Islands are K-5 schools. The 3 biggest islands, which are located in the mid-coast, have K-12 schools. And the rest of the islands are K-8, with students and sometimes families having to leave the island once they are high school age. This can have a big impact on islands when involved families have to leave for a few years. So there's all the red dots are, come to the end of the slide, but thank you.
Go back and show them where.
Do I have a pointer? Or can I?
Yeah.
Well, anyway, Matinicus is in the middle, on the closest to the bottom of the slide, so it's quite far out, and Creehaven is the island that I was speaking about that lost their year-round community. Then these red dots just show the islands that have schools. Last year, the total combined enrollment of the island schools was 477, and school populations range in size from 3 students to about 180. As this slide shows, there are also a number of different school organizational structures, with most island schools functioning as single school districts. Islanders will go to great lengths to retain their schools and provide the best possible education to the island's children. I want to share a number of examples of the innovative approaches to retaining and improving island schools that communities have taken. First, the Cranberry Isles. They are a group of islands off the coast of Mount Desert Island and have two of the Cranberry Isles have year-round populations. For many years, the students on Great Cranberry Isle took a short boat ride to attend school on Islesford, also called Little Cranberry. Then the Great Cranberry community voted to renovate their existing school building, which was no longer in use, and now both islands have modern school buildings. This picture from 2016 captures the excitement of the first day of school on Great Cranberry in many years, and you can see it's not just parents and kids, but it's the whole community. Students and teachers alternate on a 2-year cycle between the 2 schools of Longfellow School on Great Cranberry Isle and the Ashley Bryant School on Islesford. The Cranberries are betting that having a viable school building on both islands will help attract and retain young families and increase the year-round population of both islands. Another example is the island of Matinicus. A few years ago, Matinicus had no school-age children living on the island. The community voted to keep the school open anyway, with the promise of hiring a teacher if and when a family with school-age children came to the island. The next year, 2 young families moved to the island, and the school once again had a teacher and students. And here in Casco Bay, Long Island seceded from Portland 25 years ago, in part to protect their school. Chebeague followed Long's lead and seceded from the city of Cumberland in 2007, and both communities and islands are thriving. Another creative way island schools have to solve the problem of being small is through magnet programs. Islesboro has been a magnet school since 1997 for grades 5 through 12, and about 1/3 of the school's population is made up of magnet students. And last year, North Haven started a residential magnet program to help bolster the declining number of students in their high school. The Portland Island schools, Peaks and Cliff, the 2 island schools in this district, are both exceptional and have great potential. And let's not forget Great Diamond Island, who tuition their students to Long Island. Peaks Island Elementary, or PIES, is an exemplar school that the Island Institute has featured at our annual conference. We've also brought groups of teachers from along the coast to visit PIES. Peaks Island has a number of similarities to the island of Islesboro in the mid-coast and could make an excellent magnet school for families that want a small school with place-based experiential approach to learning. And Cliff is much larger than it seems because it is part of an Island Institute program called the Outer Islands Teaching and Learning Collaborative, or the TLC. The TLC was started 9 years ago by Outer Island teachers in response to the isolation that students and teachers experienced. Through cutting-edge use of technology coupled with in-person events like the one in the picture, aligned curriculum and professional development tailored to the unique needs of these schools, the TLC provides a lifeline of support to Maine's 1- and 2-room schools, and Cliff is a vital part of this. Comparing island schools to mainland schools is akin to comparing apples to oranges. It's not an equitable or fair comparison, especially when considering school closures. Closing a neighborhood school is never an easy process and immediately impacts families in the community. It can mean longer commute and adjusting to a different kind of school, but it usually doesn't mean that the entire family has to leave their home, move to the mainland, find new jobs, and essentially build a new life. Closing an island school shifts the cost to the individual families and might mean having to sell their island home or trying to keep 2 homes, one on the mainland and one on the island, which is neither easy or financially feasible for most families. These are decisions that should be given very careful thought and should not be forced onto people. And then there's the impact on the community after the school closes. As we learned from Cree Haven, when the school goes, so goes the year-round island community. Closing an island school has far-reaching consequences. It touches all aspects of island life, and in the case of Cliff and Peaks, would directly impact significant investments in the islands that have been made by numerous public and private entities, such as Casco Bay Lines, the City of Portland, and the state of Maine. If the study you are embarking on could significantly impact or even close the island schools, that decision is well beyond the scope of a school board. The issue of the future of the island schools should be addressed through a well-planned, inclusive process that with all stakeholders at the table, including island leaders, island schools, school board members, city councilors, and others. Islanders are used to community dialogue and decision-making. We have to work together, we have to live together, and even though islanders can be very divided at times, we value the opportunity to go through a democratic process to arrive at decisions that consider all points of view. Both Cliff and Peaks have excellent community leaders and groups who can speak better to the needs of the island schools than I can. I strongly encourage you to include them early and often in any discussions that could result in island school closures. Finally, I would like to invite you to get curious about islands and island schools and visit or visit again. Because islands are microcosms, they can teach us all many lessons that are applicable to schools and communities everywhere. Thank you again for this opportunity. We really, really appreciate being invited, and the idea of closing an island school, the existential threat that poses to a year-round island community is something that the Island Institute takes very seriously, and we would be very happy to stay in this conversation and be a resource. And I did bring a bunch of paper resources for you. I know you got some digital, and I'm happy to answer questions. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us. My question is with regards to, you mentioned Islesboro?
Yes.
And how it did become a magnet school. Mm-hmm. And actually, it's several years now I've been thinking of this idea, obviously it's not a new idea, of having more kids go to Peaks actually to study there instead of us potentially closing it or whatever may come about. But do you know when they became a magnet school?
1997 was when they started.
And I'm just intrigued by the process they might have gone through to make it a magnet school, because I think when we talk a lot about expeditionary learning and we talk a lot about partners for our schools, I just think that's a whole interesting thing to explore.
Absolutely.
So I appreciate you informing. I did not know that, so I appreciate you informing me about that.
I know that there has been some discussion in the past between the Peaks Island School and Islesboro, and one of the things that could make it really work in a way that it doesn't work for lots of other islands is because of the proximity to the mainland. So like Peaks, Islesboro is very close to the mainland, frequent ferries. It's very possible to live on the mainland and work on the island, or live on the island and work on the mainland. And so that's one of the many ways in which there's some really good parallels and lessons to be learned from Islesboro.
Well, thank you again for all the information and being here.
Thank you.
Hi. I go to a really small high school, and I'll be like the first to acknowledge that I don't know a lot about life on the islands. But I just want to wrap my head around a lot of really real situations that I sort of know about on the island, and from this perspective at the board. Like, I have friends who go to the islands schools, and a lot of them have moved back to the mainland recently and are living there. But it's hard for me to fathom how, I know you were just talking about how the comparison between mainland schools and island schools is like apples and oranges and not comparable. But I think in a budgeting scenario, I think that comparison is a little bit inherent. Like, even though it's something that we'd really like to have, like ideologically, I think that it's something that is really real. It's really brutal reality.
Yeah.
And I think my fear is that, like, even as a student, from what I've heard from my friends going to an island school, the opportunities and access will never be as robust no matter what we can do for them going to those schools. Like, they never have the same extracurriculars or the same type of thing, just because there isn't a robust population.
Right.
And I was wondering how you wrap your head around that as a representative of that community.
Sure, yeah. It's a really good point, and you're absolutely right when you're talking, especially about the bottom line budget. If that's the discussion, the islands make no sense. And so I recognize that, but one of my messages to you is to really try to look past that and at least allow it to be a community discussion, or a discussion that involves the whole community, because like I said, when you close a school in a mainland community, it's tough, but it doesn't change everything. When you close an island school, it does change everything. So I know I'm kind of beating the drum there, but to answer your question about, yes, it's true. When you choose to live and raise your children on an island, you are, in a way, letting go of certain opportunities for those students, or you're signing up for extraordinary travel and ridiculous logistics and things like that, but you're also signing up for just incredible safety, incredible community, incredible opportunity to sort of have these informal apprenticeship relationships that happen sort of because you're part of a small community and everybody knows everybody. So there's a lot to be missed by growing up on an island and going to an island school, but there's also a lot to be gained that sort of in some ways is only available in tiny island or really isolated communities.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. That's really helped me understand that. And I definitely mean no disrespect to the island communities. I think
no,
that
I don't- none taken.
they're an awesome
Yeah.
asset. And I went to Peaks this past board meeting, and that was so special. So
Yeah.
I definitely see the assets of them being there.
Yes.
And it's just hard pragmatically.
Absolutely, yeah. Lori?
Thank you for your presentation. My dad grew up on Vinyl Haven.
Oh.
And I think in middle or high school moved to Rockland to live with his mom and go to a Rockland high school. And I think that change really impacted him, but I think it's important to recognize that not all islands are the same. So I have, like, one of my best friends lives on Peaks, and she went there until 5th grade, and now is able to participate in the extracurriculars and stuff that Peaks didn't have, whereas a bigger, and so she only has to travel 15 minutes on the boat, so it doesn't impact her life as much, whereas an island like Vinyl Haven, where the island is bigger and it's further away from the mainland, not only do they have a stronger community and more extracurriculars, like I know their basketball team won states,
Yep.
they still have those opportunities for the students, and it's further away from the mainland, so it would be more of a disruption to close that school, because it would move families off the island, whereas if Peaks doesn't have a high school, and kids can still live on Peaks and attend the mainland high school. So I think island communities are very similar in many ways, but they're not always, comparing Peaks and Vinyl Haven may not be they're not the same. So,
Absolutely, yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. And I mean, I could give you an hour-and-a-half presentation and take you to every island and really go into how unique every single one is, and every island school is unique. But that's absolutely true. They're all different, but they do have some real core issues that bind them together. Yeah. Anything else? Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Yvonne, and I want to be, in talking to Yvonne about this, and I think Member Thompson also mentioned that the intent of the, okay, well, this, for some reason, these things got reversed here. So, Board Member Thompson mentioned that the intent of the resolution was to look at all schools, and I don't believe that there is a way that we can do the level of analysis and study that we've said we wanted to do and not also include the island schools, which again is back to my point that this is not a time to say what you would vote for or against, but really a time to agree that this is an area where you would want to have additional information before you were put into a situation to have to make a decision. And again, if if you think about this, this entire process as being about being able to answer questions when we have a budget about these are the things that we looked at, and the reason that we're proposing A or not proposing B is because we've looked at it and we've made the analysis, and we don't have the data doesn't support it. The board has not voted to do that. So I do believe that we should include looking at the island schools as a part of this analysis, but I do want some guidance from the board because I want to make sure that the commission goes out to do this work with clear understanding on that. So with that, I just would love to hear from you on the right sizing, reducing costs as the ultimate purpose of this. And I agree with Board Member Thompson that it is not a foregone conclusion, but it's the reason that we're going into this work to have the data that's needed to be able to make decisions about right sizing the district. And then whether or not we're in agreement to move forward with the study, including the island schools.
Ms. Thompson.
So can I ask my questions now about the makeup?
About what?
About the makeup of the committee?
We actually, if you look at the next slide, it's commission composition. So
well, there you go.
if you want to, we can do this now. But I do want guidance around the island schools and the savings before we leave today. We didn't do that with clarity at the last meeting, and I think that to me is foundational.
So to comment on that, I do believe that we need to include, to your point, there is discussion every budget season as well about the islands, and they are unique in nature. And I think that there's many things that could be unique in nature, but I think we have to take the whole district into consideration. And so I would like them included. Like I said, my intent when I wrote the resolution was all of the school buildings, and those are our school buildings. So I do want them included because, to your point too, that we'll have the data for public members that say, well, you're only educating 2 or 3 kids at Cliff Island, but it's costing you X amount of dollars. I think we'll have data to come back with that. On the Island Institute as well, they have a lot of data. So we can come back and couple with the data that we get from this report. So I think we need to include them. Thank you.
Mr. Atkinson and then Mr. Rodriguez.
Thank you. I agree completely with what Member Thompson just said, and I was listening very closely. Yvonne, right? Yeah, I really appreciate you getting involved so early. I think you hit the nail on the head saying that the island communities need to be included early and included completely. So I think one of the things that we need to make sure we do well as we make up the committee or the commission, is to ensure that we're factoring in things like ferry schedules. I don't know if earlier in the day would work better for island community members to make meetings, and also potentially having a meeting or two on Peaks or on Cliff to engage with those communities directly. I think they are a unique situation, but that's exactly the kind of information that we need to lay out on the table so that we can, to Ms. Thompson's point, stop having this conversation about the island schools every budget season. Thanks.
Mr. Rodriguez.
Thank you, Chair. So yeah, same thing, agreeing with Ms. Thompson and Mr. Atkinson. I think that all schools that are part of our district should be included in the study. I think it's, we look back at the questions that were asked of us during the budget process, and having this level of information and information that's, that we're all dealing with the same data. I think that's crucial for us to navigate the next budget cycle. And, not just the budget cycle, I think that this information applies to all the great work that's going on in our district, and it helps to contribute to all the decisions that we have to make. So again, I agree that my understanding of the spirit of the resolution was to include all the islands, and that's what I would like to have included. That's it. Thank you.
Anyone else? Ms. Morioni.
Thank you again for coming. Yes, I would like to keep the islands in the review as well. I think, again, I must say this now because we're getting lots of emails and calls throughout the day, and calling it right sizing. I would like to strip that from what we're calling this, to be honest, because I agree with Ms. Thompson in that there's no decision made at all. Right now, I mean, I've been on the board 10 years. We have never done a full review, a full scope of all of our buildings. Our buildings don't even belong to the school department. They belong to the city. So all we're doing right now is assisting in gathering data and research on the capacity of our schools and our needs for these students to have chairs, for their little bodies. So I don't want anybody to be alarmed. There's no one's talking about closing schools at all. And honestly, when that time comes, it's going to be very difficult to even consider a lot of these things, including island schools. So right now, I would just like to look at this as an assessment, a capacity assessment. It's not right sizing. It's not looking at the budget. It's not connecting those two. Just an assessment. That's what I'd like to call it.
Let me push back on this is not about the budget. The reason we are doing this is because it came up as part of our budget process. So I don't think that you can divorce that from the intent of this study. If we're not looking at, frankly, if we're not looking at finding foundational savings as a result of this process, this is not one of the things that, in our goals as a district, we've outlined as, something that we want to do. So this is, with all due respect, I've not been here for 10 years, and you guys may have wanted to do it for 10 years, but you haven't. But we agreed to 4 goals, and one of them is not looking at, our overall buildings and looking at their facilities, at the facilities and our capacity. So if this is not about finding savings, we shouldn't be spending $200,000 and a ton of staff time and, a bunch of emails that people are alarmed about. If it's not about that, then we should just not do it.
Okay, well, I'll leave it at my opinion about what this should be about, but every year also, the 10 years I've been here, it's been a different budget. Bottom line is, sometimes it looks like the sky's falling, and then the next year it's not so bad. So point being is that we don't have a crystal ball as often you're projecting out that we're going to continue to get slash. We have a higher valuation for the city of Portland. We have people moving more into the city even, and I guess I don't want the projection to be so dim and Gloomy as it seems to be in this situation. So I'll just leave it at that. Thank you.
Mr. Atkinson.
I guess just thinking back to budget season, thank you, Chair. I guess just thinking back to budget season and some of the Finance Committee meetings, we were discussing school closures without a lot of this information, and that didn't feel right. I think we need to have these conversations, reach out to the community, get this information, lay it all on the table so that when it comes time to get into budget season, I think this is very much part of budget season. I think, budget season maybe is starting a little early. I don't know if it's tonight or whenever we actually kick this into gear. We have to have conversations about this because we're in a very difficult budget situation. I hope that changes next year. We're in better shape, but we were weighing these things, and we're weighing them against other investments that we want to make, more aligned with the comprehensive plan that we have. So I agree with the superintendent. If this is not about savings, if that's not what we're looking for through this, then it doesn't make sense to spend the money.
Ms. Thompson.
So I'm not going to clarify from Ms. Morioni because she can speak for herself, but I think to her point, what I understood it and the superintendent is by doing this work, it may or may not result in savings. So we can't go into it thinking it's going to save us money. It may cost us money. So, both ways we have to look at it from the standpoint of it may or may not provide us opportunities or recommendations to have a savings, but it's certainly a piece of the puzzle for our budget season. But we're not going to close a school to save, $1 million here, $1 million there. There's a lot more to it than that. So I think that that's what I took from what you were saying was the savings may or may not appear. You wanted the data, though, to have the recommendations. So I'm not going to speak for you, but that's what I thought.
Mr. Rodriguez.
Thank you. So I did have one question. I was hoping you would clarify. Early on the timeline, the community survey. Can you remind us, and can you clarify real quickly how we're going to conduct the survey? Are we going to do the phone survey? No. Okay.
It'll be a Survey Monkey sent out, put on the website, and so on.
All right, good. And
the phone does not lend itself to being able to
that's what
offer suggestions. It's 1, 2, 3, 4. It's not a...
I asked because I made the comment last time of the successes that we had through the parent survey this year, and that was done through the phone, but obviously that wouldn't apply. So that's why I was bringing it back up. The other point, I lost it. My thought. I'll ask again.
Can I just, one thing? I think I've been clear all along that this is not that we will, but we may. So the language that we've used throughout is that this may result in identifying savings. But it's important to enter it with a recognition that that's the reason that we're doing it, is to identify, are there savings that we can find that would preserve all of the other things that you and the community cares about. It's not a foregone conclusion that we are going to go into this to do A or B, but rather that that is the purpose of doing this, is to find, are there savings that we can get 5 of you to vote for.
I'm sorry, I remembered. Go ahead. I was just going to say, because we're doing this amazing job, it's like building the excitement for the next step, but I think the charge for the commission is probably going to explain the questions that are being raised right now.
Ms. Morioni.
Thank you, Ms. Thompson, for clarifying what I intended to say. But it is true that I get it, and I get that, but sometimes it's also sometimes how you lay it out to the community for them to be a part of the process, and I do not feel like just once a survey is including them in the part of the process. I also don't think that just public hearings after the recommendations are good enough either, even for looking back at studies that we have done in the past around Oak Point for even just our elementary school capacity and that work. We did town hall meetings, we went into the community, and so
we have a slide on that too.
2 community forums. Okay, but it wasn't extremely articulated. They had 6 just for the elementary schools. Okay. If this is the full facilities assessment, maybe 2's not enough. I'm just saying, the more we can include the community, the better. Because, well, I personally need their guidance. Thanks.
Anyone else right now? Well, I would just weigh in to say that I agree with including everything. I think that, this is about getting the data to make decisions with. And I do think that it's important to know that we're coming at this from a place of, or know that the company that we're hiring will be looking at this through a lens of cost savings. This did come out of the budget last year, this year. And, this is something that we're doing so that we can invest in our comprehensive goals, so that we can invest in programs, so that we can make the type of strategic investments that we want to as a district. And so it's really with that lens, I think, that we're asking the contractor to do this work. Something that occurred to me that the superintendent said to me at one point in our discussions, I don't know if he said it to the whole board, which is that it's then the board's job to apply our filters. So, if for, hypothetically, a study says that you would achieve cost savings by closing an island school, then it's the board's job to apply the filters of whether that's something that we want to do, because there may be other reasons that support not making that decision. So I think that's the sort of distinction that I want to draw, is that we're not making decisions about this today, and we're not being asked what decisions we'd be willing to make, because we will be applying those filters. However, the reason that we're doing this work is so that we know where cost savings can be achieved if necessary in our district. And so, I know that right sizing, I know that these are sort of hot button words, I guess, that raise concerns, and there's a lot of sensitivity around this, but I also don't feel that there should be any illusions about this work in the public either, because these are not the best case scenarios that we're faced with. They're realities out of what we're faced with financially. So that's my thoughts on this. Anybody else want to weigh in? Ms. Yuri, did I see your hand? Okay. Ms. Morioni.
Can we also please make sure that Davis Demographics is in contact with our city planners, particularly around where they might be foreseeing new neighborhood growth, things like that, new buildings being put up? Yeah,
Yes,
thanks.
for sure.
Do you feel that gives you guidance?
I do.
for
I
some- okay.
feel that we're clear that this is about identifying ways to potentially save money, and that we should include the island schools in the analysis, which does not mean anything other than we also have data on them, just in the same way that we have data on high school programs and things along those lines. So
Ms. Morioni.
Were you also clear about how we last time talked about whether we are including the 4 schools that are bonded or not including them?
we are including them.
We are including them?
Absolutely.
Okay, because I thought we had agreed we weren't including them.
No, I did not walk away with that understanding, and just to be clear, if that were the direction, it would, in essence, say that the only schools that would be up for consolidation would be what happened to be our newest and, most, updated schools. So it would be Ocean Avenue, East End, Riverton, and whatever I'm leaving out. And the Row. That's pretty new. And so that, that sort of doesn't make any sense.
Okay, so we can move into the second section.
Yep, so the commission charge in the appointment process, Chair Tarara and I have talked about this, and we believe that this should be consistent with the process that the board has for making these types of appointments, that this should be sent to the board's appointments committee, so that the board's appointments committee can come back with a slate of appointees at a later board meeting. The commission charge is what we just decided, consistent with the parameters that you've given today: review the data, engage the community, and make recommendations for cost savings ahead of the 2020 budget process. I think, given our conversation today, that we should probably change that, recommendations for potential cost savings ahead of the 2020 budget process, and then the bullets underneath just basically outline the different expectations for the commission in terms of their expected number of meetings, expected process, and timeline for recommendations. In terms of proposed composition, and again, this is just to sort of suggest a process, but consistent with the idea that the appointments committee would be the one doing this, there could be other ways that this could be configured, but we're proposing commission that would have 2 board members and 2 city councilors, then 4 staff, 2 from administration, 2 teachers, and then 4 community members, and that the staff would be nominated by the Principals Association and the Teachers Association, and the community members would represent a variety of perspectives, including parent-teacher organizations, community organizations, whether it's the business community or the nonprofit community, immigrant groups, and so on. And then also, and I think this is consistent with Yvonne's suggestion today, that we try to have people with specialized knowledge about key areas. So whether, I think Ms. Morioni mentioned people that have their transportation issues, special education, parents and community representatives from the islands and so on should also be a part of the composition of the task of the commission.
So I guess your slide here differs from the Commission on School Demographics and Capacity because it was specific, saying 2 representatives, i.e. Ben Grant, which I think we need to remove Ben Grant's name because it's probably not appropriate to put someone's name next to that. But 2 PTO representatives and 2 business community representatives with Portland Public Schools connections. So it was really specific. So I think more broadly, the 4 community members is a bit better stated. 2 principals and 2 staff representation, PEA president. I also think that we need to include in there at least 1, if not 2, ed techs, because I think they work in conjunction with the teachers, and so they're a very important component of that. So if staff, I don't consider central office staff because they're on top of assisting this group of people. So I'd like to see us not just narrow it down to principals and teachers, but also have the inclusion of ed techs.
So would you expand the commission, or would you replace
I'm going to go
people
there, yeah.
as a result?
So when I looked at the various compositions that we've had over the years, we've had 12 members. We've had the Elementary School Capital Task Force in 2010 had 15 members without the staff at central office. We had 7 principals, 6 public, 2 school board, and then amongst themselves, that task force appointed their own chair, and then we had some central office staff assist as well. So for me, I wanted to add 2 additional community-wide members, but now that you've changed the wording, that makes me feel a little bit better. But I want to increase this from 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 to about 14 or 15. Because again, when we did the elementary school capital task force, that was for the elementary. And that was 15 members, and this is much broader. So I'd like us to definitely increase that, adding ed techs, but also maybe we also think about a couple more community members. And on the Commission on School Demographics and Capacity, I think there may be a typo. It says draft meeting schedule September of 2019.
That's a typo.
Okay, I thought so. So if we could just fix that and then remove Ben Grant's name too, that would be great. And then my other question was, adding that, and it's probably not the place either. I just wanted to, with regards to the length of the resolution, if I could just briefly mention that. The resolution that we wrote was for 6 months, and I think that there's been some discussion in the press about fast tracking in the article, and I asked what that referred to about fast tracking, and that was more reference to what the consultant said would be their norm versus what the resolution was at 6 months. So I think that when it was used fast tracking in the Press Herald, people were like, well, why are you guys rushing this? And then the intent right from the beginning was 6 months. The resolutions in the past, I went back to look at all of our various facilities resolutions, and it's on par. So I just want to make sure that the community knows that we're not rushing something through to make a certain deadline with the budget, for instance. All of our resolutions over time have been 6, 7, and the longest one was 8 months. So I just want to add that little tidbit there. So yes, I would like to add at least 2 more community-wide members and some ed techs. Thank you.
Any other thoughts on composition? Mr. Atkinson?
Thanks. I would also support expanding the commission. I think that we want a broad range of viewpoints, and I would also love to see some student representation. I know that it's always valuable getting the student input on the board. If we could have one of our student reps or something along those lines, I'd like to have students at the table as well. Thanks.
Ms. Thompson?
I have a clarifying question for you. Where we weren't specific in the resolution, because do you consider Bayside a program within, or are we treating this as a facility, as a school, because they are in an actual facility? But I'm just wondering how we are going to include Bayside, is that correct?
Yeah, and we are, today you have a board focus that we'll deal with, and one of the reasons we wanted to make sure that it was on the agenda now is because we want to make sure that it is considered, because there are specific recommendations that have both financial and facility implications in the presentation that you're going to hear later today. And just like that, we intend to have a presentation on pre-kindergarten expansion in the next month, because that is also something that's been on the board's radar for a period of time, and we sort of put off until we had the results of the strategy work that's been going on, and now we're almost there, and so we want to make sure that you have that information as you move forward with, and as the commission moves forward with its work, because it does have facilities and budget implications.
Mr. Rodriguez?
Thank you, Chair. Javier, I was just thinking, and since it seems like we have a lot of people interested, I'm assuming in this topic, if you don't mind taking a few minutes to, and Alicia's not here, but to explain how you're expecting this to be funded, because the explanation that was given in the last workshop I thought was an important part of the conversation.
So it's funded out of 2018 carryover money, and again, Alicia's not here to sort of explain where the different fund sources are, but as you know, we had carryover this year, and because this is work that was proposed as part of the 2018 budget process, we believe that we have the ability to use the carryover, and it would not be an audit exception, so that's something that Alicia has discussed with the auditors and believes that we are in a good position to do. So this would not be coming out of this year's funding, it would be coming out of last year's funding.
Ms. Morioni?
I was just going to add, it's also coming out of the line item for the school board carryover.
Part of that carryover is from the school board's line, so yes, that would be, but she actually went through like this much from all of those different sources, and I don't remember the exact breakdown, but yes.
I just wanted to also echo, I do support Ms. Thompson's request of having more community members added, as well as the student representation. Thank you.
Well, I would just, I had one clarifying question to ask. I was asked by a constituent and I didn't know the answer, so I said I would ask what the justification around the 2 business members was. The constituent seemed to think that that was...
So as you can see, we expanded that. That was what you received in your packet was what was in the August 21st packet, and since then, based on feedback that we've received at the staff level as well as from my conversations with board members and others, we tried to expand that, so this is a little bit different from what you have in that original, and so the 2 business representatives explicitly, they were there to sort of represent the community at large and different perspectives from the community, so we tried to go a little deeper on that, and so that's in there.
Thank you. And then as far as expanding the commission, I don't have strong feelings one way or the other about that. I am fine with that. I would just say, I would take staff's recommendation on that to kind of take the guidance and come back with a...
So I think what you've outlined today would probably be up to 16 people instead of 12, which is what is laid out here. So is that, if we cap it at 16, I mean, I think I would be comfortable with that. It gets unruly once you get past that, but I think that would work. So, okay. Yeah.
I would like to ask the board and the staff's opinion about doing what we did also for the building committee and do similar with the community and have them apply to be part of this and to go through the same process. We could, because it sounds like we don't have a very large window to get this done, and hoping see reaction.
Sounds like I'm seeing nods that, yes, we can do that.
I think that would be fine on our end, so if that's okay, if that's the pleasure of the board, we can definitely do that.
Okay.
Okay, so quickly, communications, and again, this has just evolved from what we talked about at the last meeting, so this is our second workshop, and we've also scheduled it as a public hearing so that there would be an opportunity for people to weigh in early. We've tried to display it more prominently and promote it on our social media feeds. As we said at the previous meeting, and we're saying again today we're broadcasting the workshop, which is not our normal practice, just so that there will be a public record of this that people can go back, and if today's not convenient to be here, they'll be able to see what we talked about. And if you recall, when we did the recap, we had talked at the last meeting that today would be the day that we asked you to approve the contract. We've now pushed that back, so today is a first read on that contract and on the authorization to enter into contract, and then we will actually approve that on the 25th and begin the work at that point. And I have been in contact with with Davis Demographics, and we've started the data collection work on the assumption that it will move forward, but if it doesn't, then obviously we just won't continue with that work. So we talked about the survey, so we will do a survey to get ideas and suggestions for things that the commission ought to be looking at as part of the process. We had an opportunity to share this with the Family Partnership Advisory Committee at their last meeting, and Board Member Rodriguez is a part of that, so he knows that we did that. We are scheduling a meeting with the PTOs, so staff are working on getting something scheduled. I think we're scheduled for early October for that. We're proposing to do 2 community forums, one on Peninsula and one off Peninsula, sponsored ideally, and so we have a meeting of the Policy Public Affairs Committee on the 11th, so this will be on the agenda for the committee to talk about having that sponsored by the Public Affairs Committee as a way to get input, I think, to Mrs. Morione's earlier point about trying to do this not just at the tail end in the way of hearings, but also getting people to understand what is being proposed and, give us face-to-face feedback on, ways, things to look at and so on. And then I know that Chair Trevorrow is working with the mayor to schedule a conversation with the council so that we bring the council into this discussion earlier rather than later. So that's what this is what we've got planned out right now, but as you know, again, we talked to different people and they offer different suggestions. We are happy to adjust and add to that, but we wanted to show additional efforts to try to engage the community. Obviously, I want to shout out to Noel for publishing that article yesterday in the Press Herald. That certainly brought it to a lot of attention, brought a lot of attention to this that people might not have had otherwise. So I appreciate the Press Herald doing that yesterday.
Comments? Ms. Thompson.
So this proposed community engagement is on the front end?
Yep.
Okay. Because I was looking at which I I think we probably have it on the website too, the scope of work that when Oak Point Associates put together the actual scope of work based upon our resolution, they outlined, as we went through the resolution, the different points of the milestones, the task goals, and then what they would be. And part of it they were talking about too is we had 6 public forums. That we had interviews, and again, times of I know that there's a window here of time, but I think this was the one that was 7 or 8 months. But we did have staff interviews with district programs potentially impacted. We also, and again, with Davis Demographics, part of when I wrote the resolution, I looked at the old resolutions that we had to compile, so we weren't reinventing the wheel. And part of that outreach too was internally. So I appreciate the community engagement too. It talked about neighborhoods, and so I'm wondering if we shouldn't include neighborhood associations as part of our outreach, maybe as the community forums. They could be the sponsors as well, or combine some neighborhood associations together so we don't have, all the different ones necessarily. So, and then we had some workshops with the public too. So again, I just was looking back to see how we had done, to Ms. Morione's point, a smaller with the elementary. And it was really specific as to when we were going to engage the public and how we were going to engage them. So I hope with the hiring of Davis Demographics that they'll come back and provide you with something like this, a scope of work as we go along. But
So in your August 21st packet, it's not in today's packet, I don't believe, but there is a detailed project plan that has all of those specific pieces in there. The community engagement is not a part of it. Again, one of the things that we've cut out of their original proposal is the facilitation that they would do, and we are taking on some of those responsibilities. So again, we're happy. I think that's a great suggestion to have additional forums and to have the forums co-sponsored with community-based or with neighborhood organizations as to sort of give that sense of place to it. So I think those are great suggestions. And we obviously, this is all the front end stuff. There would also be hearings, as you heard earlier, are a part of what we expect the commission to do as part of, prior to coming to the board with recommendations. So.
And the only other thing I would ask is when you talk about prominently displayed on the website, for me, prominently displayed,
do I control the volume? I guess I do. Right.
When you talk about prominently displayed, I'm hoping that we have front and center on our front of our website, because this is such a large project. Because even going on today, our website is awesome, but a lot of the facility stuff is buried, and some of the stuff when we made the transition over unfortunately disappeared. So I would just ask that where this is such a huge undertaking and so important to our community, that we have it really on the front page and it remains there until we get to conclusion, and so that they can...
Grace is right behind me taking
button.
Those notes, and it has been for the last, since the August 21st meeting, it's one of the sort of flashing things at the front of the website, and we will, as I mentioned to you earlier, we will create a separate place where all of this information will live, but definitely.
Great, thank you.
Any last thoughts? Seeing none? Is that all? Okay.
So I think public hearing now.
So that moves us into the public hearing. So we are having a public hearing on everything that we just discussed on our work around facilities planning. So anyone wishing to address the board may approach the microphone at this time. And just to give you a quick rundown on the rules, we ask that you don't boo or cheer or make any such expressions, because this has to be a safe place for all viewpoints. We ask that you don't address any members of the board specifically, that you keep your comments to address to the chair. And when you approach the microphone, please state your name and address, and you'll have 3 minutes to speak. May begin?
My name is Crystal Gamet. I have 3 children.
2 at Brezumscat School, and if I have anything to say about it, a 3rd one in a few years at Brezumscat School. I think you can see how committed I am to our school because I've just spent 2 hours on my feet bouncing a 4-month-old baby. But what you can't see is the hours and hours and hours that I've spent committed to volunteering at our schools, not just at Brezumscat, but lots of other schools in our community. I've been really involved behind the scenes because I was pregnant and mothering, but just know that I've been following this and that now I feel ready to be more involved in a more public way. And I don't want to say anything about the island schools, but I just want to say that, because I don't know enough about them, but I just did want to say that we might not have to move off an island if our school closes, but that our school is a lot of low-income and working-class families and a lot of immigrant families. And right now, we have incredible parent engagement and incredible rich community, and that would absolutely be lost if we had to move and people without vehicles and who have to work and have 5 kids had to suddenly go, to another part of town to go to school. It's just we would lose community involvement, and that would really dramatically affect our kids' education. I think we have a really unique school because we have so much parent involvement, so much community, in part because we need to have that much, because our school is a small, primarily working class school. And for now, I feel like that's all I have to say, but I do want to reassure you that I will have a lot more to say. Well, I guess actually there's one more point I wanted to make. Sorry, it's hard to think of everything when you have a baby in your arms, but the other thing is that I want you to know how much this is affecting our school already. Like already, we're having a hard time staffing our school. Like who wants to work at a school that might close in a year? Like it's a really big deal. And also I think like our teachers are saints for staying at our school. I've heard that this has come up. I have a 4th grader and a 2nd grader, so I haven't been at the school that many years, but I've heard that for many years this school has been one of the schools that's being threatened with closure, and so all the teachers that have committed to that school are incredible to me and to our community. And another way that our school's already being affected is that we went from being one of the 2 schools out of 4 to be fixed to the bottom of the list. And so obviously that's a huge effect on our life and our community, that now we're going to be last because we might be closed. So it's like a double threat, really. And I want you to know that it already is impacting us, I guess. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Stephen Sharp at Cumberland Avenue. I first want to note that on the agenda, item 12 is your actual first reading of this item, but if you look online, it shows you, when you click on it, the only document there is the King naming process document. There is no actual document of your first reading on the electronic version of the agenda. So I haven't seen the document you're actually going to have a first reading on tonight. Ms. Moriani made a very I can't even say the word, very specific point during the workshop that the city owns the schools, not the school board. That is a very important point to remember in all your dealings every day that you work as a school board member. You don't own the schools. The city of Portland owns the schools. And the reason I emphasize this is because one of the things not one person has talked about as members of the commission are taxpayers. They're the ones who pay the bills. And not one person has suggested taxpayers be involved in this commission. It's every time we've ever had discussions, the taxpayers are the ones who are never suggested as members of the commission, of any groups that relate to schools, funding, finances, etc. I'm glad you're considering, first of all, that you described this commission. You had some very specific types of people. Now you're saying you're going to look for community members. I would hope the commission looked for taxpayers and folks who are concerned about the fiscal issues of the city of Portland. But more importantly, just her comment evokes the sense that it needs to be a city-wide perspective on what you're looking at. I fully support doing this, by the way. Fully, totally on board with doing it. I do think David's demographics price was excessively high, and I'm glad you've essentially knocked it down some. But the entire project needs to be a citywide perspective. And on that note, essentially, I think you actually need to take a little bit more time. I don't think 18 months is necessary. But unfortunately, the way it's all working out, once you go past your budget season for next year, it may make sense to just take a little bit more time. And my one final comment is to the last speaker and her concern about Presumpscot School. I'm not making a view, I want to go into this myself with a very open mind. When we had the Charter Commission, and I ran for Charter Commission, I went with only one thing that I said is that we need an elected mayor. But how it was structured, I was up to hearing other voices of how it would be structured. In this case, the same thing. We need to look at the total view of the schools, and we need to look at everything. Quite frankly, I think the Presumpscot School is one of the last schools that will ever get closed. It's not convenient to close it. Its exact location is actually in the perfect place for a school. So I actually don't think any fears that Presumpscot would not be rebuilt as a new school it's actually, to me, it should have probably been the first one to rebuild.
Mr. Scharf, your time is up.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening. I'm Sue Olafson. I'm president of the Portland Education Association, and I represent over 700 teachers and almost 200 ed techs. So thank you for making the study of district enrollment and facility capacity a priority this school year. Because it's apparent that state funding is going to continue to decline in the coming years, the district needs to find efficiencies so that we can continue on the path of quality programming, and also so that we can recruit and retain highly effective staff to deliver that programming. So the first step in finding efficiencies is to gather a broad range of data, hard data such as school capacities and public and residency trends, as well as data from the community about its wants and needs. The second step is to sift through all that data collected and create, consider, and prioritize any options that become apparent. In listening to the board's discussion on August 21st, I became concerned about the comments that were raised about taking this option or that option off the table before any data was gathered this fall. I believe that the best decisions are those that are made when information is available, more information rather than less information, and that creative solutions cannot be found if we're not willing to consider things that may not have seemed desirable at the outset. It is not uncommon to find that in thinking about the unthinkable, we come up with a solution that not only solves the problem, but also improves an outcome. So in establishing the parameters of the study this fall, I am encouraged that you've decided tonight not to take anything off the table, and I hope that you remain open to any options, solutions, or out-of-the-box alternatives that the Study Commission offers for your consideration. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening. My name is David Hopkinson of 9 Grafton Street. Bear with me while I look at this ridiculously small phone. I'm going to need about an hour and 45 minutes to tell you why Presumpscot shouldn't close. No, I'm just kidding. I'm looking very forward to this process because it will prove why the particular school that my children attend should not be closed, and that's part of the reason that I don't have a problem with right sizing. It is not doom and gloom to me. I'm redoing my wife's bathroom right now. When we go to Home Depot, she looks at tile, I look at insulation. What you're doing is the insulation work. You're providing us the backbone to make further decisions, to go to the City Council and explain why X, Y, and Z are simply off the table. And then we don't have to sit there with a face like, I really like Miss Loring. No, it's not that. It's different reasons. It's why Presumpscot beats the district in free and reduced lunch when it comes to math scores on standardized testing and things like that, which leads me to my next point. The superintendent, I'm sorry, Madam Chair, one of the presenters earlier said that the commission should not necessarily look at IB schools or other types of schools. And I would suggest that local neighborhood schools, it would be important to include that type of school, like Ocean Ave is an IB school. Maybe that does serve that particular neighborhood better. Maybe the way that Presumpscot teaches only works in that specific neighborhood. But these are neighborhood schools, so maybe there is a way that the commission can look at that, taking numbers and moving morality into it as well. I threw my name into the hat for the commission back in whenever the budget thing was going on. The representative from my district, I'm sure, will remember, and I look forward to moving that process forward. Finally, or maybe not finally, I can't really see the screen, so we'll see what comes up. When it comes to communication, it was very, almost devastating during the budget season, the lack of turnout that I saw. In my mind, these are issues that are so above and beyond the daily thing that we deal with in education. Maybe we are looking to save money right now, but realistically what you're doing is you're putting a building plan in place for the future of Portland Public Schools. This isn't enough people. It's maybe a 20th of what it should be. I don't know necessarily how to communicate so that everyone's news feed gets Portland Public Schools, or I don't even know how many Facebook fans it has. I don't know. But I bet it's not everyone. I bet it's not half. It might not even be 25% of the population. I would throw back to the school board that you represent specific districts or you're an at-large member, and that we want to see you in the school more, marketing to our parents outside on the first day, on Thanksgiving break, whatever it may be, to encourage them to come out and participate more. Maybe you could help me figure out how to do that. I'm not exactly sure, but I do think the communication on moving forward could be improved. I have 6 seconds to look through my notes again.
And you used them all up.
I used them all up. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Jamie Hanlon, Pembroke Street, Presumpscot dad, business owner, taxpayer, so on and so forth. I just want to underscore what David just said and give one specific piece of feedback, which is the proposed community engagement. All of those groups listed are sort of self-selected groups, and it's really going to skew the sample badly. So yes, I would recommend that individual board members reach out to schools in their neighborhoods, recruit parents who wouldn't typically be involved in a process like this. For me, this is very difficult being here after work with 3 kids here. But there's a reason you don't see more parents here. For one, this is the first day of school. So this counting as a public session is not something that really is that we should be congratulating ourselves for, because for parents this is a very inconvenient day and very unrealistic day to expect parent turnout. And I think it's really important that you not get self-selected groups when you're looking at who's involved in this process, particularly parents. It doesn't need to be the same cast of characters. It needs to be people from a very broad perspective. And I urge you to do that. And like Crystal and like David, I will continue to be here fighting for Presumpscot. But you should have parents from all the schools that are at risk of being caught here in person fighting for their schools and explaining to you what makes them different, what makes them special, and why closing them is not an option. Because it's a serious responsibility that you've taken on, and you simply as board members don't have that specific knowledge of what matters about those schools. So I really encourage you to, as you form this committee that's going to influence this process, to make sure that you have broad viewpoints. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, my name is Mark Wakefield. I'm from Portland, Maine. I'm in the school coordinator for the school department on State and Common Ave with a busy section. We need to get the speed limit reduced. Number one, the traffic's going way too fast. One of the days, there's going to be a bad accident. You should take this very seriously, lower the speed limit down from 25 down to 15. And I figure like I know what's going on, 'cause I'm trying to do my job. Now, I've been working for the city for 3 years, going my 3rd year, and I'll keep going the longer it takes. And I'm trying to do we're trying to do our jobs, trying to get the kids one location to the other location. We have so many people trying to do our jobs, and it's very important. I do take the job very serious. Not the ones I call sick. As that one time, there was a little position I had to get care of. After I've been working every Monday through Friday what other people do. And that's the honest truth. And I figure like, thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, John Thibodeau, 114 Clinton Street. All right, kind of splashed together my notes here, so I may not be as good as I'd like. So I've been somewhat out of the loop this summer, and I think like many people was taken aback by reading the Press Herald yesterday. So forgive me for any lack of understanding or knowledge that I've missed from this past couple of months this summer. Just to go back to last spring, I remember the resolution and the discussion around it regarding retrieving and analyzing data. And at that time, I believe most understood that resolution to be an open-ended inquiry and data gathering process to help inform future decision making. I think that was pretty clear, and I believe that's how it was presented publicly. However, what was reported yesterday in the Press Herald with comments by multiple board members and the superintendent seemed like something very different than what was discussed last spring, like very different. Reportedly, it's a fast-tracked process that will use significant resources of the Portland school staff to give recommendations in January, and that closing a school is very much on the table. And if a report did recommend a closure in, say, February, this body could be under tremendous pressure from greater forces to do just that. I fear that could be rammed through with the general public largely on the outside looking in. I know how legislative processes can take on a life of their own, especially in budget season. I hope my fears are just that, but thus far I have heard nothing to dispel them. Of a particular and concerning note, I have heard comments from one school board member who said they would be surprised if a school wasn't closed after the report's release. And I know some on the school board are on record strongly supporting the closing of neighborhood schools. So you can understand how I and many others are very concerned regarding what is happening here. And I hear confusion tonight. I do not hear clarity from this body tonight regarding what this is, what the intention of this is. That's concerning. This is a major undertaking. Taking a step back, less than 1 year ago, this board led an effort to follow the clear values of the city to rebuild our 4 elementary schools. And the voters had a clear opportunity to weigh in regarding rebuilding 2 versus 4 elementary schools. And they overwhelmingly expressed their view to rebuild 4 schools. Now, again, less than a year removed, you are saying we should again consider the possibility of whether we should close one of our schools. That flies in the face of your recent 2-year process and the city's larger democratic process. And I'm trying to understand, and I know there's a lot I don't know, but what I do know is enrollment is consistent and static and has been for years. We know what our needs and values are as a community. I think we've done a great job with that. And we know what the buildings can handle and what we're going to be, hopefully they can handle as they're rebuilt. We also know that forecasting student enrollment is very difficult, and even Davis Demographics themselves were recently off in their projections for our own schools. So I ask you to discuss and clearly frame what this process's intentions are and explain how
your time is up.
Just another minute. I would ask you to slow down and clearly frame what this process's intentions, it's the wrong paragraph. I ask you to discuss and clearly frame what this process's intentions are and explain how it went from what was passed last spring to what was reported yesterday. I ask you to slow down and clearly frame this. What are these intentions? I'm guessing any decision to close a school would not impact the 2019 budget anyway. If the board could answer that, I would appreciate that because that seems really relevant. why is this being rushed if there's no connection to this immediate budget? And also, too, it appears that everyone is assuming a far-right administration will be back in Augusta in January. But at this juncture, I think it's a 50-50 prospect. And historically, LePage is an anomaly. And maybe he'll be normalized, but maybe he won't be. And that's a huge data point. Who's in the administration? I wonder if making this decision in 8 weeks or 9 weeks might be wiser. The last part I'll just end it is, so many times from this body and from the city council, I've heard it's a revenue problem, and again, I may have missed it, but I have not heard or seen any discussion of revenue. And I ask, and again, I don't know, has there been any conversations about creating a task force in this body with the city council to explore revenue sources? I think the community has identified what we want as schools and what our values are, and we've lost revenue from a source. Has there been any effort to find new revenues and partnering with the city council? And if there hasn't, I ask you to do that. And just, I guess that's it. Thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Cook.
Good evening. I'm Kim Cook. I'm City Councilor with District 5, which represents part of Deering Center, Riverton, and North Deering, north of Allen Ave. I'm also a parent of 3 children in our public schools, 1 at Lincoln and 2 at Longfellow. And I really came here tonight in part to hear the presentation, which I only caught part of. I apologize. I was at another city council meeting in another room before I came here. But I wanted to get up to commend all of you for undertaking this process. I think it's a difficult undertaking, and I appreciate the leadership you're showing in moving forward with that process. And I'm glad, as I understand it, you've left the scope broad and decided to gather data on a number of opportunities for efficiencies, for savings, and I think for potential, new opportunities that looking at things a little differently might bring. So I really appreciate you taking that under consideration. I also just wanted to mention that coincidentally, in the Economic Development Committee tonight, we were looking at TIF policy, tax increment financing policy, which seems really dry and unrelated, I suppose, to this, but the capture rates on our TIF districts actually impact how much we get in school funding from the state, as well as revenue sharing, which we know is a huge challenge. And so I just wanted to say that just in another room at the same exact time you all were undertaking this, we were looking at new policy that will help to ensure that we don't lose any more state funding than is required under the school funding formula. And earlier today, I spent 2 hours with our legislative delegation as a city councilor, talking about things like revenue sharing and the school funding formula. So just at least from my perspective and from others on the council, we are working hard to try to steady out the funding as much as possible, and I would encourage all of you to stay in communication with your state reps and senators as well, to let them know how important it is that we continue to receive a fair share in state funding. So thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, good evening. My name is Jean Swanton, and I live on 69 Thomas Street. Thank you for bringing up this very difficult topic, and I think you're going about it the right way, and hopefully we can address it. Many years now, we've been having task force and boundary committees and spending a lot of money. Like in 2016, the $500,000 facility assessment. In 2014, the redistricting initiative. So it sounds like you're really going to work and make some differences, or at least if we don't change anything, we have a common understanding as to why we didn't. And I think that ties in with the climate, and I think that's what we're hearing from Presumscott right now, that they are on the chopping. They have, whenever this comes up, and it comes up often, because it's an easy thing to say, oh, we can save money by redistricting and closing schools. Presumscott is always the first one said. And, as you all know, years ago it was closed and it started again. So, yeah, they're nervous. They have a chip on their shoulder, and it's hard to learn, and it's hard to be positive when things like that happen. So, it's great that we're going to put some concrete advice on this. And the third thing I want to talk about is just the communication. Oh, and also, wait a minute, back to Stephen. With that approach, with them on the chopping block, I know on the other half, it's always a tax issue too. Everybody's concerned about their tax increases, so it's not an easy situation. But with the communication, I was thinking some suggestions maybe. Meeting with childcare would be really helpful, especially when you're talking about schools and you want the parents. It's really hard to have kids in at this time. Maybe you could do like a tables at a farmer market, so it's always available. I know that means adding additional staff. And maybe do some advertisements on the Press Herald, like some bold button stickers or something to just get a larger audience, because it's not just parents, it's taxpayers, it's community members, old, young. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any other public comment?
Turn the phone off, sorry. My name's Crystal Canny. I live on 103 Gleckler Road, Senate District 27, and I'm a candidate. For the past few months, and this is on topic, but it's going to seem a little bit off topic, I've been meeting with people to talk about the Bayside learning community. And I had a great meeting with the superintendent, who was gracious enough to give me his time as well. I think as we talk about closing schools, I hope you will move more quickly and take a look at the Bayside learning community. This is an inappropriate facility for children, without question, because of what they walk by every single day. I have had conversations that have absolutely mortified me about how children have picked up loaded hypodermics in the parking lot. And none of us would want our kids to deal with this on a daily basis, and they are. And I'm hoping that you will, as you talk about closing, I actually am here to advocate for the closing of that facility and the moving of those children to a facility where they don't have to deal with this on a daily basis. I just think it's atrocious. I don't think you should wait until the study is done, which is a great thing to do, but I think you have some urgency around this. If I was a parent, I would be talking to the Disability Rights Center. I would be talking to a lot of lawyers. And I think what's going on is wrong. It's wrong. They're in a basement without windows. They're in a dangerous neighborhood. And that's something that I really think you should consider. And it's been a lack of leadership that has gotten us to this point. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments?
Hey there, John Torsch. I live in Parkside, on the executive board of the Democratic Socialists of America, and I'm running for District 2 City Council. I had some comments. I wanted to throw one extra in first, just on the note on including taxpayers. If we're talking about just somebody who pays any taxes, that's all of us. But if we're talking about property taxpayers, which I imagine that's what was being discussed, I'd just like to make it clear about how exclusionary that is of the working class. Most of us rent. We don't own, so we're not paying property taxes directly. So if we try to skew that conversation towards the wealthy, I think we're going to end up with results that may not actually impact the people that are using these public schools. Regarding the process as a whole, I'm in support of it. I'm a data engineer, so I think that to make informed decisions is the most responsible thing that you can do. As a socialist, I think I'll have more to say when the discussion gets to making cuts to education, but that's for another day. Tonight's about the process itself, from what I can glean. One of the items I'd like to implore the board to look at is a thing called participatory budgeting. When it comes time to actually make those tangible cuts and make decisions on what savings we can make for future investments, that's a process that I think would be really important here. I think public hearings and town halls are really great, but unfortunately, as we've seen lately in these chambers, the city council's made room for the public to comment and then voted in direct opposition of the majority. So if the people that are on the board have some pre-decision about what's actually being discussed, it's only through a process like participatory budgeting that you can actually have the communities that are going to be affected making those decisions for themselves. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Seeing none, I'll close the public comment. So that concludes the public hearing, and we'll move into our business meeting. Board members need a 5-minute break. Okay, we'll take a 5-minute break, and we'll be back for the board meeting.